Rain poured down the city streets, blurring neon lights into streaks of color. On the corner, huddled beneath a tattered blanket, sat a man the world no longer noticed. His hands were cracked from cold, his stomach empty for days. At his feet, half soaked by the rain, lay a leather wallet, heavy, full, unmistakably valuable. For a man who had nothing, this was more than luck. It was escape. Food, shelter, maybe even a second chance. He could already feel the weight of hunger lifting, the thought of warm bread in his hands. But as he picked it up, his eyes lingered not on the bills inside, but on a small photograph tucked in the fold, a smiling woman and child. And in that moment, the man made a choice, one that would leave a stranger sobbing in the middle of the street. His name was Daniel. Once not so long ago, Daniel lived a life that looked ordinary from the outside. He had steady work in construction, a modest apartment, and a daughter whose laughter filled his evenings with meaning. His hands were rough, his back sore most nights, but he carried his burdens with quiet pride. He believed that as long as he worked hard, life would reward him. But life has a way of breaking even the strongest men. When the company he worked for folded, Daniel lost not only his paycheck but his footing in the world. The bills stacked higher than his savings, and each month became a losing battle. First went the apartment, then the car, then painfully his ability to support his daughter who had to move in with her grandmother. Daniel told her it was temporary, but temporary stretched into years, and the streets became his permanent address. Today, his home was a narrow stretch of concrete outside an abandoned storefront. His possessions fit inside a frayed backpack, a threadbare sweater, a cracked water bottle, and a single photo of his daughter, edges worn from being held too often. And yet, despite his emptiness, Daniel carried himself with a certain dignity. He never raised his voice to beg. He never chased strangers with outstretched hands. Instead, he looked for scraps of honest work, offering to carry groceries, sweep a sidewalk, or watch over the cart of another homeless man while they searched for food. On nights when he had nothing to eat, he would still split a stale sandwich with the runaway boy who slept 2 blocks away. The world rarely noticed these quiet acts. Most people saw only his ragged clothes, not the character beneath them. Some looked through him as if he were invisible. Others looked down on him as though his situation were a choice. Daniel had grown used to the stares, the mutters, the way footsteps sped up when he approached. But what he could never ignore was hunger. It gnawed at him daily, twisting his insides until every cent of food on the street felt like torture. He could feel coins rattling in strangers' pockets, always out of reach. And yet, even with his stomach empty, Daniel clung to one unshakable truth: survival should never come at the cost of his soul. He often heard his mother's voice echoing in his mind, words spoken long ago. "Daniel, you may lose everything in this world, jobs, homes, even people you love, but don't ever lose your honesty. That's the only treasure no one can take away." That voice was his compass. Even as the world stripped him of comforts, it could not strip him of character. Daniel lived with almost nothing, but he lived with integrity. And on one rainy evening, when fate placed a leather wallet at his feet, that integrity would be tested like never before. Her name was Rebecca. From the outside, Rebecca looked like the kind of woman who had it all together. She wore sleek blazers, carried a polished leather handbag, and moved with the brisk pace of someone always on the verge of her next meeting. She worked in corporate finance, a field that demanded sharpness, deadlines, and decisions measured in millions. To colleagues, she was confident, efficient, even enviable. But beneath the surface, Rebecca was fraying. She was a single mother raising a young son, Michael. Every morning began with the chaos of packing lunches, finding missing shoes, and juggling school drop-off before rushing to the office. She carried the weight of being both provider and nurturer, often feeling like she was failing at both. On good days, she told herself she was strong. On bad days, she lay awake in the dark, wondering how much longer she could keep everything from collapsing. Money was not her problem, time was. She could buy her son toys, pay for his lessons, and keep their home comfortable. But she rarely had the energy to sit with him, to listen to his stories, to simply be there. In chasing success, she was losing pieces of what mattered most. The pressure of her career made her sharp, sometimes too sharp. She judged quickly. If someone walked too slowly in front of her, she sighed impatiently. If a cashier fumbled with change, she rolled her eyes. And when she passed by the homeless on the street, she avoided eye contact. To her, they were background noise, another problem she couldn't afford to think about. Not out of cruelty, more out of exhaustion, numbness, and the belief that survival meant keeping her head down and pushing forward. Still, Rebecca wasn't heartless. She loved her son deeply, and every sacrifice she made was, in her mind, for him. She wanted to prove that she could stand on her own, that she could provide the kind of life he deserved. But in chasing that dream, she had built walls around her heart, closing herself off from strangers, from empathy, from the small connections that make life human. Her life, like her schedule, was always in motion. Meetings stacked on top of one another, calls buzzing as she crossed streets, text messages demanding answers even during dinner with her child. She had trained herself to move fast, to keep moving, because slowing down meant feeling the loneliness she fought so hard to hide. And so, when her path crossed with Daniel's, she carried all of this weight, her ambition, her pride, her exhaustion. She didn't know that the man she barely noticed sitting on the sidewalk would soon hold her fate in his hands. For Rebecca, losing a wallet would feel like a disaster. For Daniel, finding it would feel like temptation. And together, their worlds were about to collide in a way that neither of them could have imagined. The subway station was a blur of motion, heels clattering against the wet pavement, umbrellas jostling for space, voices echoing in the cavernous stairwell. Rebecca hurried down the steps, her phone pressed to her ear, her bag tugged over one shoulder. She was late for a meeting, late to pick up her son, late for everything it seemed. In her rush, she didn't notice the small leather wallet slip from her bag and tumble onto the rain-darkened ground. It landed just a few feet away from where Daniel sat, shivering under the overhang. At first, he didn't react. People dropped things all the time, loose change, receipts, wrappers that the wind carried away. But when the crowd thinned, the wallet remained, its shape unmistakable, its leather worn but expensive. Daniel's eyes lingered. Slowly, almost cautiously, he reached for it. The weight surprised him. It was heavy, real. His fingers trembled as he pulled it open. Inside was a small stack of crisp bills, more money than he had seen in months. His breath caught. His stomach tightened with a painful growl as if his body instantly understood what this discovery meant. There were credit cards, too, and neatly folded receipts. And then, tucked into one of the plastic sleeves, was a photograph. A boy, maybe 7 or 8, with a toothy grin, holding the hand of the woman Daniel had just watched hurry down the stairs. Rebecca. Daniel stared at the picture longer than he intended. The boy's smile reminded him of his own daughter when she was that age. For a moment, memory and reality collided. Her tiny hand in his, her laughter in the park, the way she'd look at him like he was the strongest man in the world. He blinked the memory away, but the ache stayed. His gaze dropped back to the money. His mind ran wild. With this cash, he could eat tonight, maybe even for a week. He could buy socks without holes, a blanket thick enough to survive the nights when frost bit through the air. He could step out of survival mode, even briefly, and breathe. His hunger urged him to close the wallet and hide it away before anyone noticed. His shaking hands almost obeyed. But something inside him resisted. A quiet, stubborn voice, the same one that had kept him honest when everything else was stripped away. It whispered of his mother's lessons, of dignity, of the truth that money could fill a stomach but not a conscience. He stared at the photo again. That boy had no idea his mother's entire life, her cards, her cash, her identification, was lying in the hands of a stranger. Daniel imagined Rebecca realizing it was gone, panic in her eyes, fear for her son's safety, fear of losing more than just money. His heart pounded. Hunger screamed one thing, integrity whispered another. The rain drummed on as if the city itself held its breath, waiting for his choice. Finally, Daniel snapped the wallet shut and pressed it against his chest. His face was wet, whether from rain or something else, he couldn't tell. He knew what he had to do. Tonight, he would not be the man who took. He would be the man who gave back. And so, against every gnawing instinct of survival, Daniel rose to his feet, the wallet heavy in his pocket, and stepped into the current of strangers to find the woman who had lost everything. Daniel ducked beneath the station's overhang, clutching the wallet in his hands. The rain had softened into a mist, but the chill still cut through his bones. He sat back down on the curb, his body trembling, not just from cold, but from the weight of the choice before him. He opened the wallet again. The bills almost glowed under the flickering streetlight. His stomach twisted painfully, reminding him he hadn't eaten in 2 days. He imagined himself walking to the diner at the corner, ordering hot soup and bread fresh from the oven. He pictured the steam rising, the taste filling his mouth, the warmth spreading through his chest. He imagined, just for one night, sleeping with a full belly and a blanket he bought himself instead of one pulled from a trash bin. The fantasy was almost intoxicating. His fingers brushed the edges of the money. But then his eyes fell back to the photograph. The boy's grin was wide, unguarded, innocent. Daniel imagined Rebecca searching her bag, realizing the wallet was gone. He could almost hear her gasp, the rush of panic flooding her voice. He could see her clutching her child's hand tighter, wondering how she would pay for what mattered most. His thoughts drifted to another time, years ago when his own daughter was that age. He remembered carrying her on his shoulders, her tiny fingers tangled in his hair as she laughed without fear. He remembered her looking up at him with absolute trust, as though he could never let her down. What would she think of him now if she knew her father had kept something that wasn't his? Would she still see him as the man who once promised to always do the right thing? Or would she see only a shadow, a thief defined by desperation? Daniel's mother's voice echoed in his mind, firm yet kind. Integrity is what you do when no one is watching. Money can vanish, homes can vanish, even people can vanish, but if you lose your honesty, you lose yourself. He shut his eyes tightly. The hunger inside him roared, but so did something deeper, the quiet, stubborn pride that had kept him from slipping into bitterness all these years. He wasn't going to betray the last piece of himself that still felt whole. Slowly, Daniel whispered into the rain, as if confessing to the night itself. "I can't keep what isn't mine." The words settled over him like a strange kind of peace, heavy but right. He closed the wallet carefully, tucking the photograph back into its place with almost reverent care. It wasn't just leather and cash, it was someone's life. Someone's proof of love, someone's fragile sense of safety. Daniel rose to his feet. His legs felt weak, but his resolve was steady. He scanned the street, searching for a glimpse of Rebecca in the thinning crowd. Somewhere in this storm of strangers, a woman was retracing her steps in panic, desperate to recover what she had lost. And he would find her, not because it would change his circumstances, but because it would preserve the only thing that truly mattered, his integrity. That night, in a city that often looked past him, Daniel chose to do the one thing that would not let him disappear into the shadows. He chose to do what was right. This decision would not just alter his life, it would change hers, and soon it would ripple far beyond either of them. Daniel lingered near the subway entrance, the wallet pressed against his chest under his damp coat. People flowed around him like a restless tide, brushing past without a glance. His body shivered violently from the cold, but his eyes never stopped searching. Minutes passed, then through the blur of umbrellas and hurried faces, he saw her, Rebecca. She was moving quickly, her heels clicking against the wet pavement. But there was something frantic in her movements, something different from the polished, controlled woman he had glimpsed earlier. Her hands dug through her purse, scattering receipts, pulling out cards, then shoving them back in with increasing desperation. Her expression was taut with panic. She stopped abruptly, turning in circles, scanning the ground as if the wallet might magically appear at her feet. Daniel's heart pounded. This was the moment. For a second, fear clutched him. What if she didn't believe him? What if she accused him of stealing? He had been invisible to so many, judged by others before they even heard his voice. but the weight of the wallet in his hand reminded him why he had made this choice. He stepped forward slowly, almost timidly, weaving through the crowd until he was just a few feet from her. His voice was quiet, careful, but steady. "I think this belongs to you, ma'am." Rebecca froze, her head snapping toward him, her eyes locked onto the wallet he was holding out. Her entire body stiffened, suspicion flashing across her face. For a split second, she hesitated to take it. In her world, strangers didn't return wallets. Strangers took them. And here, standing before her, was a man with ragged clothes, rain dripping from his hair, exhaustion written into the lines of his face. Her first instinct was caution. What did he want in return? Money, gratitude, something more. She extended her hand slowly, almost defensively. But then Daniel spoke again. His voice softer this time, stripped of any demand, layered only with sincerity. "It was on the ground. I didn't look through it, just didn't want you to lose it." The tension cracked. His words disarmed her completely. She reached out and took the wallet, her fingers brushing his, cold meeting colder. Rebecca opened it immediately, her hands trembling. Everything was there. The cash, the cards, the receipt she needed for the hospital, and most importantly, the photograph of her son. Her breath caught. Relief surged through her so powerfully it made her knees weaken. She looked up at him, really looked at him for the first time. Not just a homeless man, not just someone she would usually pass by without a thought, but a human being who had chosen honesty when it would have been so easy to choose otherwise. Her lips parted, but words failed. For a moment, all she could do was stare, the wallet clutched against her chest as if it were her own heartbeat she had just recovered. Around them, the city hurried on, indifferent, unaware. But in that small circle of rain-soaked concrete, the world slowed. A woman who had everything to lose and a man who had nothing left to give stood facing one another, bound by an act of unexpected decency. The silence stretched until Rebecca finally whispered, her voice breaking, Why would you do this?" Daniel simply lowered his gaze, a faint, tired smile tugging at his lips. "Because it was yours," he said quietly, "and I couldn't take what isn't mine." And in that moment, before the tears came, Rebecca felt something stir inside her, a crack in the walls she had built around her life. The woman clutched the wallet with trembling hands, almost afraid to open it. For a moment, she just stood there on the crowded sidewalk, breathing fast, her eyes darting from the man to the leather in her grip, as though reality itself might betray her. Finally, with unsteady fingers, she slid it open. Inside, everything was there, every card, every folded receipt, every picture, even the small note her daughter had written, "Good luck, Mom, you'll do great today," was tucked safely behind the driver's license. She let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The relief was so sharp it almost knocked her off her feet. But it wasn't the recovery of her belongings that broke her heart wide open. It was him. The man standing a few feet away, shoulders hunched against the cold, eyes lowered as if he expected rejection even in this act of honesty. He looked nothing like the villains she imagined when she realized her wallet was gone. No, he looked worn, fragile even, like someone the world had passed by too many times. And still he had chosen this. Honesty, integrity, the harder path. Her throat tightened as her memory stabbed at her. The way she had brushed past him earlier on the train platform, clutching her bag tighter when she saw him near. The silent judgment she had made about people who looked like him, shabby coat, tired shoes, a face weathered by nights without enough rest. She hadn't seen a man then. She had seen a threat. Now, standing in the glow of street lamps and passing headlights, she saw him clearly. A human being. One who, despite having so little, had resisted temptation when many with everything might not have. Her hands shook, her chest heaved, and then without warning the tears came. Not quiet tears, but great, racking sobs that burst from somewhere deep inside her. She pressed the wallet to her chest as if it were a sacred relic and covered her face with her free hand, her body trembling. "Thank you," she gasped between sobs. Thank you, oh my God, thank you." The man shuffled awkwardly, clearly unprepared for such a display. He wasn't used to gratitude, not this raw, not this desperate. He raised a hand as if to calm her, then let it fall, uncertain of his place in her grief and relief. People on the street began to notice. A young couple slowed down, curiosity in their eyes. An older man paused, adjusting his scarf, watching the strange scene unfold. A mother pulled her child closer, whispering something before moving on, though her gaze lingered. The woman didn't care. For years she had held herself together, through stress, through loss, through the daily grind of responsibilities. But here, now in the middle of the city's heartbeat, she let herself fall apart. Her tears weren't only for the wallet. They were for her own arrogance, her hardened assumptions, her blindness to the quiet nobility that still lived in the world. She reached out and clutched his arm with both hands, her grip firm despite her trembling. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice breaking. "You could have kept it, you could have, but you didn't, you don't even know me." He looked at her, finally meeting her eyes. His voice was soft, almost apologetic. "It wasn't mine," he said simply. "It never was." The simplicity of the words shattered her all over again. She nodded rapidly, tears streaming down her cheeks, and whispered, "You don't know what this means to me, to my family, to my little girl." For the first time that night, he allowed himself the smallest of smiles. It wasn't pride or triumph. It was gentler than that, an expression of quiet relief, as if all he ever wanted was to do one thing right in a world that rarely gave him the chance. And so, in that frozen moment on the city street, surrounded by strangers, she cried openly, cried for her wallet, for her misjudgments, for her unexpected deliverance, and thanked him again and again, as though her words could somehow repay the honesty that had restored not just what she lost, but something she didn't even know was missing, her faith in people. The woman wiped her tears, still holding the worn leather wallet in one hand and gripping the man's arm with the other as if afraid he might vanish. Her sobs softened into shaky breaths, and for the first time she really looked at him. His coat was frayed at the sleeves, his shoes barely held together by tired stitching, and his eyes carried a weariness that came not from a single sleepless night, but from years of being overlooked. She swallowed hard. "Have you eaten today?" she asked, her voice breaking. He hesitated, embarrassed. "Not yet. It's all right," he said quickly, as if excusing himself for being hungry. But she wouldn't let it pass. Without a second thought, she led him to a nearby cafe. They walked side by side, and though his steps were quiet, hers carried a new determination. Inside, the smell of warm bread and coffee wrapped around them. She ordered more food than either could finish, insisting he choose whatever he wanted. When the plates arrived, steaming bowls of soup, bread rolls, a hot sandwich, he sat there for a moment, staring as though it were all too much. "Go ahead," she urged gently. The man lowered his head, murmured a thank you no one else could hear, and ate slowly at first, then with the hunger of someone who had long grown used to waiting. She watched him, not with pity but with a newfound respect. Every bite he took seemed to quiet something restless inside her, as though she too was being fed, not with food but with perspective. Between bites, he began to share pieces of his life. Once he had worked in construction. Once he had a small apartment and friends to call his own. Then came an injury, lost wages, rising bills, and eventually the unraveling of everything stable. The woman listened, her heart tightening with every word. What struck her most wasn't his hardship, but the humility with which he spoke. Without blame, without bitterness, only a quiet acceptance of how quickly life can change. "You could have kept it," she whispered, glancing at the wallet now tucked safely in her bag. "No one would have known." He met her eyes, and for the first time she saw a flicker of pride in his tired gaze. "But I would have known," he replied simply. The words struck her harder than any lecture could. Here was a man with nothing, yet he refused to compromise the one thing left to him, his integrity. That night she couldn't sleep. The image of him eating, the sound of his voice, the honesty in his eyes, all of it lingered. By morning, she opened her laptop and began to type. She wrote about losing her wallet, about her assumptions, about the stranger who returned it without touching a single bill. She described how she cried in the street, how she shared a meal with him, and how deeply it changed the way she saw people she used to walk past without a second glance. She hit publish and closed the laptop, not expecting much. But within hours, her story began to spread. First, a few friends shared it, then their friends. By evening, it had reached thousands. Comments poured in. Faith in humanity restored. "We need more people like him. Where is he? How can we help?" Soon, local organizations reached out. A shelter offered him a bed. A community group gathered clothes in his size. Someone even set up a donation fund. What began as one act of honesty spiraled into something neither he nor the woman could have imagined, a wave of kindness, generosity, and hope. When she saw him again, wearing a clean jacket given by a stranger and carrying a bag of food from yet another well-wisher, she couldn't help but smile through tears. "You see," she told him, "you didn't just give me back my wallet, you gave people back their belief in goodness." He shifted uneasily, not used to such attention. "All I did was what anyone should do." But deep down, she knew better. Not everyone would have done it, and because he did, lives, his own included, were changing. In that moment, standing under the fading light of day, she realized something profound. Redemption doesn't always arrive in grand gestures or sweeping miracles. Sometimes it begins quietly, in the pocket of a lost wallet, in the hands of a man who chose honesty, and in the ripples of kindness that follow when one heart finally sees another. The weeks that followed unfolded like the slow thaw after a long winter. At first, the changes in Eduardo's life were subtle, almost fragile, like the delicate sprout of a plant pushing through cracked concrete. The shelter that had reached out to him after the woman's story went viral gave him a bed, meals, and most importantly, stability. For the first time in years, he wasn't waking up shivering under an overpass or wondering where his next meal might come from. At night, he slept on a mattress that wasn't made of cardboard, wrapped in blankets that smelled faintly of detergent instead of damp streets. But the most profound change wasn't material. It was in how people looked at him. Strangers who once passed him with averted eyes now nodded, smiled, even stopped to say hello. Volunteers at the shelter treated him with respect. For Eduardo, who had grown used to invisibility, this new recognition was disorienting at first. Yet slowly, he began to stand a little straighter, to meet people's gazes, to feel the forgotten weight of dignity settling back on his shoulders. One morning, the shelter coordinator approached him with cautious excitement. "There's a local cafe looking for a dishwasher," she said. "It's part-time, but it could be a start. They know about your story, they're willing to give you a chance." Eduardo's first instinct was doubt. A job, after so many years without steady work. His hands trembled as he filled out the application. But the cafe owner, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, didn't seem to notice his nervousness. "We all stumble," the man said simply. "What matters is that you stood back up." The first weeks at the cafe were grueling. His body wasn't used to long shifts on his feet, and he came home bone-tired, his arms sore from scrubbing pans and carrying crates. Yet there was a rhythm to the work that gave him a sense of purpose. With every paycheck, no matter how modest, he felt the invisible chains of despair loosen. Meanwhile, the woman Clara, as he finally learned her name, did not disappear after the story quieted online. She visited him at the cafe one afternoon, her young daughter in tow. Eduardo felt a pang of nervousness as he wiped his hands on his apron. He wasn't used to visitors. "Mommy, is that him?" the little girl asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. Clara smiled, guiding her daughter forward. "Yes, sweetheart, this is Eduardo. Remember the story I told you?" The girl broke free from her mother's hand and ran to him, wrapping her small arms tightly around his waist. Eduardo froze, stunned. It had been years since anyone had touched him with such pure, unguarded affection. "Thank you," the girl whispered against his apron. "Thank you for giving my mommy back her smile." The words pierced through him, soft yet powerful, settling deep in a place he thought had withered long ago. He blinked rapidly, trying to keep his vision from blurring. All he could manage was a hoarse, "You're welcome." For Clara, that moment wasn't just gratitude, it was recognition. She saw in Eduardo not a man defined by his struggles, but by his choices, his humanity, his quiet strength. She invited him to join her and her daughter for dinner that evening. For Eduardo, sitting at a family table, eating a warm meal in the glow of conversation and laughter, was like stepping into a forgotten dream. Over time, Eduardo became a fixture in the cafe, earning the trust of his boss and the camaraderie of his coworkers. Customers who had once read about him now greeted him by name. The transformation wasn't sudden or miraculous. It was a collection of small victories, strung together like beads on a necklace. Each one represented not only progress, but also the ripple of kindness that had begun with a single returned wallet. The man who had once been invisible was now part of a community. And though his journey was far from over, Eduardo carried with him the certainty that one honest choice, made in a moment of cold hunger by a subway platform, had not only restored a lost wallet but had reignited something far greater: faith, connection, and the possibility of a new life. We often think that generosity belongs to those who have more than enough, people with wealth, comfort, and security. But the truth is, some of the purest acts of kindness come from those who have nothing to give except their heart. This homeless man had no home, no family, no safety, and often no food to eat. Yet when life handed him a choice, he chose honesty over temptation, integrity over need. He could have walked away with that wallet and solved his hunger for weeks. But he didn't, because deep down he valued dignity more than comfort. And that is the kind of lesson we all need to carry with us. Integrity is not about what you can afford to lose. It's about what you choose to give, even when you have nothing. That one decision did more than just return a wallet. It restored hope in a woman who thought goodness was gone from the world. It gave a child a reason to believe in kindness. And perhaps most importantly, it reminded all of us watching that compassion is not measured in money. It is measured in choices. So the next time life puts you in a moment where you can choose between self-interest and kindness, remember this story. Remember that greatness isn't always about changing the world. It can simply be about changing one person's day, one act at a time. And maybe, just maybe, that's how real change begins. If this story touched your heart, share it forward. Let it remind someone else that humanity is still alive and that kindness, even the smallest kind, can echo louder than we ever imagine.